when you mixed Death Note with Dexter, you get a killer paradox. So, down the Korean drama rabbit hole I've gone, which I've watched quite a few, and I plan on watching a few more, so I may do a top 10 Korean drama list for the year. But getting off that for a second, let's talk about a show that is labeled as a crime thriller, dark comedy, and if there's comedy, I don't know where it is, but it is a show called The Killer Paradox. So, what is the show about? A Killer Paradox is about Lee Tang, who was discharged from the army 6 months ago and struggles with his life and dreams of visiting Canada. He works at a convenience store and relies on his parents for support. One night, he is assaulted by a customer outside of his shop, leading to a violent confrontation and subsequent murder of that customer. Tang is guilt-ridden and prepares himself to be either discovered or turn himself in, but then he discovers the victim was a serial killer. Now, a dutiful detective, Jang Name Game, remains uncooperative and keeps on investigating despite it being ruled out as an accident. It is unclear who Name Game is. Tang continues to kill, revealing a hidden talent for detecting killers, previously unpunished evildoers without leaving traceable evidence. The story explores the question of whether Tang is serving justice or evading it. So, a Killer Paradox is basically if you took Death Note, the investigation part, and you took Dexter, the killing bad people part, and you smashed them into a Korean drama. That's basically what this is, with very wild, surrealist scenes. So let me start off with what I think the good, the bad is, and a warning. I will warn you, to fully understand why I like this, I'm going to give a slight spoiler at the end, but I'm not going to say until the end of it. But this is a wild ride. So my good points for this show. Pretty much everything. This show is crazy. From the first episode is kind of slow till you get to the ending, or at least the middle portion where they begin the investigation, and then you find out what's going on. And then a bunch of things are introduced in here that appear that they're going to go somewhere, and they go somewhere you do not expect. Now, I'm not going to, when I do get into spoilers later in this review, I'm not going to get into anything that throws off the whole investigation part of it or what it all means, but I will spoil some things to kind of get a sense of why I like this show so much. So, what's up, Ryan? Do you eat your corn long ways? Weird question. I guess going this way. Anyways, I hope that answers your question. Anyways, so A Killer Paradox is very intriguing. So first off, I want to say when I'm doing my ratings here, for something like this, I want to kind of break it down into the investigation portion, the action portion, and the drama, seeing as to this Korean drama blends all of these together. The action is great. The investigation is not really a mystery. And the drama part is very light. This is more of an action focus kind of. Oh, thank you. Big fan of Stranger Things. Check out my review coming out later. I love Stranger Things. I'll be doing a review when the new season drops. I might do a complete series review. So check the channel back for that. But I want to talk about the initial setup for this. So the fascinating part is diving into this person who comes back. Now, I served in the military myself. I was in the Navy. And I like the perspective of how they dive into the psychiatry of somebody coming back from doing service. And he lives a very bland, uneventful life. Lee Tang, by all accounts, is not a very interesting person until you get to this dilemma he faces after he kills this person. And from there, you have my second favorite character of the show, which is the detective of the show, who is named Zhang Nin Game, or Zhang Game, or they just call him Zhang through the show for short. He is the investigator. And I think it's important when you have these kind of dramas, especially with a detective and a killer, or a detective and an anti-hero, and I'll get more into that later. But it's interesting only if the two people who are facing off, the two antagonizing forces, are interesting. And the detective is a very interesting character, even though he doesn't get much characterization until about near the end of the show. Especially an event that motivates him to where the second half of the series goes. The actor is very charismatic, and you could see on the thumbnail the way they oppose each other. You have Tang, who's kind of this puppy dog looking vulnerable guy who's doing these horrible things, and you have this detective who looks rough and gruff and kind of has a heart of gold. And the juxtaposition between the two of them really works in the favor of the show, because it makes a very intriguing back and forth, especially when you get into the later, or the last like 3 or 4 episodes. It's very interesting. Now, there's another character who's a supporting character that I want to talk about that really makes this show for me. It played by Kim Yo-han. He's called Roy Bin. He plays a nerd. And hey, Carmen, what's up? And I really love the Roy Bin character because in his room, he's got a bunch of Batman shit and superhero stuff. And this is what adds layers onto this drama and makes it really worth your time in checking this out, is the fact that you have two opposing forces where Tang is not killing people who aren't just vile, and they're established as very vile people. And Roy Bin joins Lee Tang's quest to figure out what it all means and how he gets this kind of sense for sensing people who are off. And he sees him as like a Batman kind of thing, and he's his Robin. So it's very interesting to see these two people when the mystery gets going, and you see that there's this nerd who thinks that he is serving justice, and he does these voiceovers that kind of remind me of if Robin was narrating him and Batman's what's up, Kristen? Good to see you. Him and Batman's adventures, where he's talking about criminals can't be punished, and sometimes you've got to go outside the bounds of law to find true justice for victims and things like that. But these people are so horrible, the show makes you question if Lee Tang is a bad guy or not, which I'm going to get to that as I get into spoilers, because I got to tell you why I like the show so much. But unlike Dexter and things like that, it doesn't necessarily say that he is like this Avenger, but it doesn't question whether he's evil either. It just shows you two opposing forces, and you as an audience member have to determine whether or not you think Lee Tang should ultimately face justice. I think the really big theme is, should somebody who is killing people who are genuinely evil be arrested or face some kind of consequences for essentially doing something that the law can't do? And I find that a very intriguing premise. At the same time, the person, Lee Tang, who is doing these murders in the name of justice, suffers just as much as the criminals. And he's not a killer like Dexter. Like, when you see Dexter, Dexter has no emotions. He has no connections to killing these people until later in the series. But very early on, Lee is haunted with the ghosts of the people he kills. They literally go into his mindscape, and he talks with these people who are victims, and he fights them as, I guess, some sort of metaphor of him fighting his inner demons about committing these crimes. So he's not an emotionless killer. He is very much affected very deeply by his first kill all the way to the end of the show. And they do a great job of him showing each time he kills someone, he loses a bit of himself. He loses a part of him that makes him this shy, kind of really heartfelt guy you meet in the beginning to this cold, calculated, visually killing all of these people. And in his quest, he tangles up his family, some innocent people. And so there's multi dimensions to this story and the way that they tackle vengeance. I thought that that was good. The visuals in this are great. The fight scenes in this are actually phenomenal. And I was not expecting a lot of fighting for what this is trying to be. Now, like, don't get me wrong, you don't get into like some martial arts fights, but there is some good like back and forth fights. There's some traps. There's very brutal kills in this show. Like, I had no clue. No, I'm not going to be ranting today. I had no clue how brutal the show was going to be. There's a scene in episode 2 in about the last 15, 20 minutes. That's got to be one of the most brutal scenes, I think, in the show, quite honestly, just because of the way they frame the camera and they kind of hold on an action that happens. And once again, this is going to be slightly longer because I'll get into a spoiler section and go into a few details, but I'm not going to give enough to ruin the show. There's just some things I want to point out that are cool. Now, my negatives for this show. Really, the only negatives I have is with a character they kill quite early that I thought was one of the most fascinating people he ran across. And just some of the people he kills in general, I would have liked to know more about the serial killers, like their mindset and things like that. And not all of them are serial killers. Some of them just do terrible shit. And I feel like the show is going at such a breakneck speed because there's only 8 episodes that they don't really have time to focus in on the people that he's taking out. Some of them are in quick cuts. And I think the thing with Dexter that gave it a lot of layers was knowing the serial killer psychology and how they justified these things that they did in their head and getting into the mindset and spending a whole season with a killer while Dexter hunts them down. And I get the show's not going for that, but I think it would have added more to the question of questioning Lee Tang and whether or not he's killing people who deserve to die or these people can be legitimately redeemed by the law. I think it would have added an extra layer to the questions that the show obviously wants to present to us. The other issue that I have with this show is the sister of Lee Tang, who's featured quite a bit in the beginning and then just kind of disappears and doesn't really have much to do. Lee Tang's family, I get why they put it in here to kind of show him living with them or whatever else, but I feel like they don't contribute anything to the story and they kind of take away from the pacing. It slows down, like the police come, but it really doesn't go anywhere. There is a reveal that kind of has to do with the family, but at the end of the day, it doesn't add anything to the story. It doesn't give us depth to Lee Tang. It doesn't give us depth to why he made such a traumatic switch as much as showing us his emotional state and his mental state as he's going through here. Other than that, nothing too big. The only other issue that I have is that about episode 5, they introduce probably one of the most chilling, I want to say, antagonists for Lee Tang, who is a guy who does what he does. Only he was an ex-cop, and he uses his skills to track down these people he knows are terrible and just kills them. And they explore his backstory in the last 2 episodes, particularly the last one. And I am a little upset that they introduced him near the end of the show. He doesn't come in till about episode... He's introduced here and there, but he doesn't really make an appearance until about episode 4 or 5. And then 6, 7, and 8 is him and Tang and this dude trying to track him down. And I think I would have liked to know just a little bit more. They do get into his character and why he's doing what he's doing, but I feel like he was so intriguing and so terrifying, and the way they resolve his story, kind of, I don't know. I would have liked to see him get out of it and have, because him and the main character have such a great chemistry. I think it's one of those cases, and I understand this is adapted from a webtoon, but I think keeping him around or changing it a bit would have made it fascinating. He was just straight terrifying. And when you find out what you find out about him, it still doesn't help. He's very much a scary character. And I wish they would have explored him just slightly, just a hair more. But let's get into my ratings, because I don't want to get into anything of why I like the show. But I am going to give this show, out of all the dramas that I've seen, a 9 out of 10. This show is amazing. It is wild. It is crazy. The reveals that happen are nuts. I was sitting back last night and watched the rest of this show, and I got to episode 8 and was going to stop. And from 8 to 10, or I got to episode 6 and I was going to stop, but from 6 to like 6, 7, 8 was some of the craziest shit that just like, there's a cliffhanger at the end of each episode, but the cliffhangers from like 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are so good. It's just one of those things where you just keep on going because it's just crazy. So I give this a 9 out of 10. If you don't want any spoilers, I want to give you a spoiler warning. I'm going to get into some light details of why I like this, but if you are intrigued, but you just want to get a good idea of whether or not this will be the show for you, then stick around. So let's break it down. So this show essentially started out with Lee Tang as this standard normal guy trying to achieve this dream, not really going anywhere. He kills this dude outside of the convenient mart who happens to be a serial killer and grapples with that guilt. Now, the thing to me that really cemented this show was once they introduced the detective and his investigation process and how he gets a sense from Tang that something isn't quite right. But I want to talk about Tang and break down what this is. So it's implied he has some kind of sixth sense, not anything supernatural, but more of just a very intuitive kind of person. Now, they're very vague on where this comes from or what this is or why he's so good at it. But there's two things that kind of got me from dropping this from a 10 to a 9. One, they don't explain how he's able to make this evidence disappear. It's implied that he kind of black outs and subconsciously cleans up everything, or that there was somebody helping him along. Now, the disappointing thing I wanted to talk about was a character who came in the second episode called Son Yoi-uk, or okay, Korean names. I apologize. She witnesses the murder. And they do this fascinating thing in episode 1 to 2 where they have her witness this murder, and she goes to extort him for money to Tang for money to hush her. And the second episode is him gathering all of this money to pay this blackmail. Well, at the ending, he kind of black out, and it's implied that he murders her not because he senses she's bad, but because he feels like she's trying to make him like a dog and just do these things for her now that she holds this thing over his head. So when I say gory, the scene at the end of episode 2 is he uses for a while before he meets up with Roy Bin, he uses his hammer, and he like envisions hammering her in his mind and does it in real life. So we see what it looks like in this dream world he's created, and then we see what it looks like in reality. And I don't know why, but this has got to be the goriest scene, I think, in it, because he bashes the shit out of her with this hammer and she falls back. But the way they show her head kind of tilt and this pool of blood just everywhere from where her head fell back, dripping down, and then she's got like this service dog, and the dog is licking up the puddle of blood. And the dog does come back later. Like I said, this is light spoilers. I'm not going to go through the whole plot. You got to watch the show for yourself. I'm just highlighting some key moments here. And it was super, super visceral and very much like, I don't know why it got to me. But one of those things where I was like, holy shit, it's just the way that they snap from the dream into reality. And then the shots in this show, I don't think the show is particularly very violent as far as like the brutal stuff I've seen, but as far as them lingering on certain shots and setting certain things up and quickly showing these gory things happening or these quick flashes, it's very visceral, even for a split second. And it does make you question if Lee Tang is right until you figure out that the witness he killed that was blackmailing him actually killed her parents and set her twin sister or she threw boiling water at her and burned her ears and her throat. And the sister comes back and says, I hope the bitch is dead. And it keeps you in this space where you know what he's doing wrong, but at the same time, you kind of start to get behind what he's doing because these people are just terrible people. There's this one dude cheating on his girl who gave him gonorrhea, and then he meets up with this other girl. He winds up strangling her. Like, there's a lot of bad people in this show. And there's this one called Lee Gong. I'll call him Lee for short. So you have the three main players in this game is Lee, Tang, and Zhong. And Zhong is chasing Tang, and Lee is chasing Tang. And you get to a point in the show where all of these people are kind of converging, and Roy Bin is trying to help Tang, and eventually sides with Jang, who's the detective, and to get Lee, who is the other murderer, coming for Tang. And it becomes this whole big crazy game of cat and mouse between the police, this other righteous killer, and Tang trying to invade everybody else while trying to kill these people. And it's very fascinating show, very interesting and kind of weird. The other thing that was interesting was the character himself, Lee. So he is a killer too, but when you first are introduced to him, I was sitting there trying to guess who he is, and I'm not going to tell you his backstory or anything. I'm not going to ruin that for you, but he does have a backstory that connects with one of the main characters. And so he considers Tang sloppy, but is also curious as to why he is doing what he's doing. But they both kill in the same manner. But Lee is very interesting because he has a different sort of code than Tang has, but they kind of have the same thing. And so his reasonings for killing people are different, but they kind of align together. And there comes a point where he's chasing him, but he's also testing him to see where his morals lie, because Lee is an ex-cop. And so he got tired of a system that doesn't work and started killing people, while Tang accidentally fell into this role. And as you can guess, it all comes down to these people converging in the final episode in this big face-off against each other. And Roy Bin, who's been helping Tang, his sidekick, kind of is forced to align with this cop because he's very scared for Tang and how they both have opposing views, and he's worried about his buddy. And that's as much as I could give without doing a super deep dive into this show. But I think the first two episodes are slow. but they have a good hook. But if you get into like the third and fourth episode, that's where this show gets fascinating. Now, my other thing that keeps this from being a 10 is the fact that certain episodes do have a lull in them. These are 45-minute to 63-minute episodes, and there's 8 of them. But I feel like some of the longer episodes didn't really do much to add to the story. They kind of drag out the pacing of the overall entire show just a hair. And I think that it'll keep you intrigued, but there'll be some parts where you'll be like, come on, let's get to what I want to see, because they'll do a thing where they'll have a character you're interested in an interesting storyline, and then they'll kind of cut to what the police are doing and stuff like that. Also, too, there's a character I don't particularly care for named Sun Suk, or Zhang, or not Zhang Ning. His partner. His partner is Young Ji. Young Ji is a very headstrong young detective who's the partner of Zhang, and he rushes into shit and gets everybody in danger. He feels like a plot device. I didn't really care for his character much, and I felt like he dragged down the show. I get what they were doing, showing the dynamics between the older detective and the younger detective and all that. I get it. I didn't find it very engaging. Other than that, this is a pretty solid show. The ending of this show is fucking wild. The ending of this show goes so crazy. And I think that's going to be a contention with people, because this show does not go where I expected it to go. There's some people who won't make it. I'm not going to give any spoilers away. Like I said, watch the show. But the thing I love about Korean dramas is they are not afraid to kill off main characters or people you like. So I'm just saying, be prepared. I'm not going to tell you who, but there's a lot of people who don't make it to the end of this. There's a lot of wild shit that goes down, and it all happens in episode 8. Episode 8 of this show has to be the most exciting episode of television I've seen in quite some time. Like, when I tell you shit gets crazy, from the beginning of 6 until the end of 8, this show just goes and does not take a breath. It doesn't stop. There's so many things that are happening. And like I said, Lee Jung is probably my second favorite character, the opposing killer with morals. And I found the whole premise just fascinating. So if you want an interesting show that's kind of out of the box, I warn you, it's a little weird. It's a little strange. Some of the stuff is hard to follow. It does come together at the ending, but you have to have a little bit of patience. This show is definitely great. I loved even the title. Like, when you watch the show and then you understand what the title means, a killer paradox, because it is a paradox of whether or not they are, it is in fact acceptable to have a killer like this, or what's the morality behind that. But anyways, in the comments below, let me know, what have you seen a killer paradox? Are you now interested? Is there other K-dramas you could suggest for me? I have been going down the K-drama rabbit hole. I found a lot of interesting stuff, and I may do a top 10 list for the K-dramas of this year. I'm going to do a top 10 horror movies of the year and a top 10 movies of the year, which is going to exclude horror. And I'm also thinking of the top 10 worst horror, top 10 worst movies, that kind of a thing. So I'll be doing that towards probably November, late November, early December, so I can get all the lists done, because there's quite a bit. And I'm hoping to catch all of these shows and things and kind of have them pick out before I start my list. But I've watched a lot of stuff this year, so there's going to be a lot of movies. There's going to be a lot of shows. I might do top 10 Netflix shows. I don't know. We'll see how it all shakes out, how many things I wind up watching. Don't miss tonight. We will be doing a tier list for a tier list of the best Star Wars heroes. And this is kind of going into a new week of tier lists. We're going to be doing best Star Wars heroes, best Star Wars villains. We'll do a battle between them. And then the best MCU heroes, the best MCU villains. We'll do a battle with them. And then eventually we're going to do the best Star Wars heroes versus the best MCU heroes, and the best Star Wars villains versus the best MCU villains. So that's the grand plan of what's coming up. I also have a couple of reviews coming out. I saw an early screening of Deadpool. Unfortunately, due to a review embargo, I am not allowed to do a review on it until the day it comes out. So look for that probably on Thursday, opening day of Deadpool Wolverine. But unfortunately, the mouse has put a gag, so I can't review it until then. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hit that like, share, subscribe, and as always, remember, there is only one rule here in the Phantom Zone. Kneel before General Zod.